Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. Do go and get yourself a lovely hot cup of cocoa or something lovely and warm to keep you all energized, because we're on part 3 of our story tonight, and what an exciting story it is too. So many strange things happening. An aunt who loses her memory, can't remember what happened to her in the woodgrove, why she was walking around in such a daze, and a father that appears to have gone missing in his aeroplane over the Bermuda Triangle. So it is a fascinating story, and let's continue with it, shall we? At 10 years old, I stood there very stoically, with my eyes directly pinned on my mother, my heart pounding violently in my chest, as I watched every reaction on my mother's part, as she spoke to the caller very solemnly. I knew by my mother's expressions, which I could read very well like the back of my own hand, whether the news would be good or bad. The tension in the air was so palpable, you could have almost cut it with a knife. My little head was screaming, "Please, God, may Daddy be okay? I'll do anything you want, I promise. If Daddy's all right, I mean. I'll pray 100 times a day, more if I have to, God. And I promise I'll never ever take any cookies from the jar without asking first." I was to learn later that people in dire situations such as ours very often negotiate with God when the life of a loved one is precariously hanging in the balance. And I think on that day God did answer my prayers with the efficiency of a dart heading straight for the bullseye on a board. "Hello," came my mother's tentative voice. "Yes, it is Mrs. Stevenson speaking. That's right. Is that airport control? Oh, good. I'm so glad to have you on the line. Have you heard any news from my husband yet?" "What? You're kidding. You found a signal. You picked up my husband's plane. Goodness, that's incredible. Do you know why you lost the signal in the first place?" "Oh, that is extraordinary, isn't it?" "Yes, it is quite a mystery. Very enigmatic. I mean, he was flying over the Bermuda Triangle of all things, and then this happens. Yes, it does make you wonder about stories you hear, doesn't it? I never paid them much attention myself, but now it makes me wonder. You've never seen this before, except when a plane goes down or flying too low. Oh, I do feel relieved, yes I do. It's almost as if I've got my life back. My son is standing by me on the phone. He looks so happy to know that his father's all right." "Does my husband know why he lost a signal?" "He doesn't. That's very strange indeed. But thank you so much for getting in touch so quickly. Yes, I feel as if I can breathe again. It's good news all round. I never expected this. Thank you so very much for calling." My mother began to jump up and down. Once she'd finally put the receiver down, she ran towards me and flung her arms around me, and then began to throw me up and down as if I was a frisbee. I'd never been so happy. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but these were tears of relief. In that moment I knew everything was going to be all right. My father was not dead, and that was the best news I could ever have received. In that quintessential moment, as a 10-year-old boy, I became poignantly aware of the extreme fragility of life. It really scared me, but it also made me truly appreciate those that I loved all the more. I could barely wait for my father to return home. I would tell him how much I loved him, and up until then, I hadn't actually been very good at doing that, because I'd always been rather shy in that regard. But this time things were extremely different, and I was going to tell him how much I loved him and shout it from the rooftops if I could. Let's just say when my father did return home, he didn't look any worse for wear from his trip, other than being rather fatigued. He naturally received a rapturous welcome from me and my mother. I think it overwhelmed him a little. He wasn't used to being so enthusiastically welcomed back into the house. "I thought we had lost you," my mother cried out. My father just smiled and said, "Don't be ridiculous. Of course you haven't lost me. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, aren't I?"
Unfortunately, the two of you are stuck with me, warts and all, I'm afraid."
Me and my mother did happen to notice that there was something profoundly different about my father, as if something was preying heavily on his mind. But whatever it was, he wasn't willing to share it with us. But it was so subtle. If we hadn't known my father so well as we did, we probably wouldn't have noticed such a change in his demeanour at all.
"I'm very sorry you both had such a fright," he told us.
"Fright? Is that all you can say, Anton? That's an understatement, let me tell you. We've been going through hell and back worrying about you," said my mother, sounding exasperated. "We thought we had lost you for good, Anton. I thought you'd crashed your plane in the Atlantic Ocean, and that the ocean had swallowed you alive. I don't know what we'd have done if you hadn't returned home safely. What with Max dying, my sister's memory hanging on its hinges so fragilely, and then your plane going missing. I personally thought I was going to have an emotional breakdown. Thank goodness my mother managed to talk some sense into me, reassuring me that no news is good news. What happened? How on earth did your plane lose signal like that?" My father shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly. He simply shook his head. My mother described him as being extremely evasive, as if he was clandestinely nursing a secret that he didn't want to share with anyone. My mother even told my grandmother, this in another conversation over the phone, that I happened to overhear. I know exactly what you're thinking about me. And I confess that at 10 I was quite the little eavesdropper. But I had no siblings, and so I very much enjoyed listening to adult conversations, as I hated being kept in the dark about anything. When my mother was on the phone to my grandmother, I quickly picked up the receiver in the kitchen. I could hear the click on the telephone, but my mother didn't. Otherwise she'd have shouted down the phone to tell me to get off the line at once. But she didn't. I was lucky to be able to catch the gist of the conversation. "Ma'am, I'm telling you, something very strange happened to Anton on his flight over the Bermuda Triangle. I know it did. I can feel it in my bones. But he's simply refusing to talk about it or open up at all. When I asked him why his plane lost signal and why he was unable to communicate with airport control, he said he didn't realize that any of this was happening. He didn't answer my questions. He became annoyingly vague. I'm telling you, getting him to open up at all, Mum, is like trying to prise open a rock-hard oyster shell that refuses to budge. I think the experience, whatever it is, shook him to the core. I really believe that. I know his plane did not fly below radar. So why was there no signal, Mum? Can you explain that? I just can't get my head around all this. It's a baffling mystery. You know what Anton's like. He doesn't believe in anything paradoxical. And so if something weird happened to him that he couldn't explain, he's probably waging an internal war about it, trying to persuade himself it never happened, as it goes against his resolute beliefs about this world. But whatever happened to him on that flight over the Bermuda Triangle, I do have a sense it must have been quite profound. There are moments when I notice that Anton has a faraway look on his face. I've never witnessed that before on him, you know. He's the kind of man that lives in the moment. But now I regularly catch him daydreaming. Goodness gracious, love, that is unusual for him. Very odd behaviour on his part. But you have to admit, 1 minute the plane vanishes and then it reappears. All I can say, love, is thank goodness it reappeared. There have been many paradoxical cases like this in the history books, where planes over the Bermuda Triangle have gone missing and never been found again. All I can say is we can thank our lucky stars that Anton is safe and well and back home with the both of you, and that's what counts at the end of the day. You say he looks as if his mind is miles away. But does he seem particularly different to you? Personality-wise, I mean, my grandmother asked. Well, yes, Mum. Now you come to mention it, he does seem rather different. He's still himself, of course, but softer, more gentle. And he's been particularly kind towards Hunter, very considerate. Come to think of it, he's less in my face these days, if you know what I mean. He's been circumspect and reflective,
And this daydreaming, well, it's very bizarre. I was talking to him the other day. He didn't even hear me. He failed to acknowledge me. Finally, he looked at me and said, "What were you saying?" He's been so distracted, Mum. I'd never seen him like this before. When I told him that my sister Helena had lost her memory and that she was moving in with us for a while until she got back on her feet, he said to me, "Helena who?" I said to him, "Anton, I'm talking about my sister Helena. Remember I told you she had a gash on her head. I told you she took a fall at the rock pools, where a farmer found her wandering around in a dazed state. She's been in hospital. She's making excellent progress, but her memory has been impaired. But every day she's remembering a little more, so she's well on the mend. Dr. Levine believes she needs to move in with us for a while until she finally recovers her memory. But her prognosis is very good. Dr. Levine says once the swelling has gone down, he's optimistic that Helena will make a full and very good recovery." Mum, when I told Anton all this, he looked at me blankly and then said, "Well, that's very good news, isn't it? I had no idea Helena took a fall. Why didn't you tell me about this? I didn't know she had lost her memory. What a dreadful thing to happen. You should go and visit her in hospital. Buy her some flowers to cheer her up." "Mum, I can't tell you how many times I told him about her condition. Half a dozen times it must have been. And I've told him that I've visited her several times at the hospital. But it did not sink in. It's like Anton has not listened to me or heard a word of what I've been saying since he got back from that flight. He's usually so much on the ball. But sometimes I feel as if he's in another world, because he doesn't appear to be paying attention to what's going on around him, as if he's caught up in his own little bubble." "Interesting, very interesting," said my grandmother. "If I didn't know any better, I'd say that he was also suffering an impaired memory like Helena. But I don't think that is what's going on here." "You don't, Mum?" "Of course I don't, love. Goodness gracious me, that is not what's happening. We've both deduced that something happened to him when he flew over the Bermuda Triangle. Something very strange. Whatever that was, it is clearly occupying his undivided attention. My guess is he's just not fully engaged in his current reality, or what's going on around him. Probably because he's so caught up with what did happen to him on that plane. He's refusing to talk about it, that's very obvious. I think we can establish that something did happen to him. But what it was, I'm not sure we will ever know. We know what Anton's like. He can be like a closed book at the very best of times, and if he doesn't want to talk about something, then we won't get anything out of him at all. I wish I could see what was going on in his head. By all accounts, the stories I've heard over the years about the Bermuda Triangle have always been fascinating. But your husband has been flying over the triangle for quite a long time, without any incident, and then the plane loses signal without explanation, and miraculously disappears off the radar, and then reappears again. Furthermore, what you're telling me about his behaviour is very peculiar. He's definitely hiding something, love. And you say he's so distracted. Well, that is revelatory, if you ask me." "Those are my thoughts exactly, Mum. You've echoed everything that I've been thinking of late." "Well, sweetheart, all I can say is if it were me, I would drill him a lot more. I wouldn't give him a minute's peace until he told me the truth. That's what I would do if it were your father." "Yes, Mum, but Anton is not like my father. He's not forthcoming when he doesn't want to be. He simply told me that he couldn't understand how the plane had lost signal, and that's that. Apparently everything was just fine. But I don't believe a word of it, Mum. I know he's hiding something, and I wish to God I knew what it was. Look, love, maybe when he's thought about things a little more, and he's meditated on what has happened to him, maybe then he'll talk about it. Once he's made sense of everything, perhaps. Just on changing the subject for a second, love, are you absolutely sure you're going to manage looking after Helena at your home? I could move in, if you like, to help you out. I know you've been through so much drama of late. You're absolutely exhausted and overwhelmed, and on top of it all, you've got tennis classes to teach. I'd really be happy to help out, if I may. Make myself useful, even if it means keeping Hunter busy for a while. Not to worry, Mum. Helena's beginning to remember a few things. I think we're going to be fine. We're going to get there slowly and surely. I've got a good feeling we're getting Helena back, and I think I can manage on my own. But if I am struggling, I will take full advantage of your offer. We'll make sure you do, love. Just remember I'm here whenever you need me. We'll do so, Mum.
Anton Stevenson.
I've always been the kind of person that believes only in the things that I can physically see with my naked eye. I was a bit of a science and math geek when I was at school. I was useless at anything that involved applying my imagination, or an injection of any particular kind of inspirational creativity. I do even recall my English teacher at school describing my essays that I wrote as being so uninspiring that it would have been preferable to watch paint dry, because they were so dreadfully dull. For some reason I could never tap into my imagination. Looking back, I don't think I've been the best father to my son Hunter or my wife Bridget. I've been a bit of a Scrooge over the years, taking the fun out of Christmas for little Hunter by telling him that no Father Christmas doesn't exist and that no Max, our family dog, had not gone to heaven. I resolutely believed in saying it as I believed it to be, because I arrogantly assumed I knew it all. I didn't want any child of mine to be deluded. More fool me. It would seem this stinky attitude of mine went down with my wife Bridget like a lead balloon, for she reprimanded me on many occasions for robbing Hunter of his childlike imagination. I admit that I would find myself feeling exceedingly irritated with my wife Bridget, reading fictional stories all the time and watching movies on television. I thought such frivolous, indulgent entertainment and fancies were a complete waste of time, and that she was filling her mind with cotton wool. It all seemed dreadfully nonsensical to me, not to be focusing on anything that was real. I could not understand for the life of me why she wasn't reading something of real substance, like the National Geographic, or watching the History Channel on television, perhaps. But no, she liked all this light-hearted stuff. I didn't appreciate at the time that we are all so different. I was trying to mould both my son Hunter and my wife Bridget to become exactly like me. The reality is, why on earth would I want to do something like that? If my wife Bridget were like me, it would be tiresome to be married to her. Actually, I would loathe to be married to myself. I couldn't imagine a worser fate. I don't exactly consider myself all that fun to hang around. In truth, I don't know exactly what my wife Bridget ever saw in me in the first place. I know I'm extremely lucky to be married to the likes of her, and having her in my life is a very, very good thing. She's a wonderful woman who has always been my anchor, and besides all that, she's an excellent mother to my son Hunter, and I couldn't imagine my life without the both of them in it. For a long time I never believed in God, or any kind of higher power watching over us, as my short-sighted, very limited paradigm of the world as it is was so contained in a perfectly upholstered bubble of my own making. But that was all about to significantly change when I took a routine flight over the Bermuda Triangle. Looking back, I'm inclined to believe that if there is a God, whoever he is, he must have a jolly good sense of humour, for he was about to show me that our world is not what we think it is, and there is so much more than we can ever imagine. Little did I know that I would go through a kaleidoscope of paradoxically outlandish experiences that would ultimately shift my view of reality for good. And one of those cryptid experiences would involve my wife's sister Helena, who lives on her own in a similar style farmhouse to ours. But unlike Bridget, Helena has never married. For me personally, it was more convenient from a work perspective for us to live as a family in Miami, but that was never going to happen. My wife Bridget was practically joined at the hip to her sister Helena, almost as if they were non-identical twins. When I married my wife Bridget, she told me in no uncertain terms that not only was I marrying her, but her entire family as well, and that she wanted to live in a quiet rural community. And that, for me, seemed like a small price to pay, if it meant that Bridget would agree to be my wife. "I love my sister Helena so much," she told me in no uncertain terms. "I have to live close by her, and my mother as well, so I can see her every day." My wife and her sister are both tennis coaches, very good ones, I may add. They share similar passions, but Helena is, without wishing to sound rather rude, a lot more absent-minded than my wife is, with an inclination to be extremely forgetful at times, whereas my wife has a memory on her like an elephant, and forgets absolutely nothing, sometimes to my peril, I'm afraid to say, as she never forgets significant dates, and once, I hasten to say, when I forgot her birthday. Well, let's just say I'd rather not go there, but if you're a man listening to this, you get where I'm going with this. I had to make up for my forgetfulness in leaps and bounds, with chocolates and flowers and plenty of special dinners out. But I was in the doghouse for quite some time after that, before Bridget finally had the goodness of heart to forgive me. I will admit, even to look at, Helena bears an uncanny resemblance to my wife. Shoulder-length, dark bobbed hair, shiny and healthy looking, perfect fair unblemished skin, hazelnut eyes that in certain lights almost become green. Both have petite athletic physiques, as you would expect with women who exercise a lot, and spend all of their time on the tennis court teaching students to play good games of tennis. Many folk around town assume that my wife and her sister were non-identical twins, because they are so insanely alike. When I married Bridget, I was used to the fact that Helena would be around the place a lot, as the two women were so inseparable, and practically living in each other's pockets. They do everything together. And when I took my family on vacation, yes, you've guessed it, Helena would come along too for the ride. So yes, she became a beloved member of my family, and even I enjoyed having her around. And as for my son Hunter, he loved the bones of his Aunt Helena. If the truth be told, I do rather suspect that Hunter sometimes believes he has two mothers. He's grown very close to his Aunt Helena. So when she ended up getting amnesia, after developing a strange gash to her head, after taking a routine bicycle ride through the woods to enjoy a swim at her favourite haunt, the rock pools, it would seem her fortuitous accident upset Hunter very much. I think after losing our beloved family pet dog, Max, that my son was now worried that everyone around him might suddenly just pop their clogs and die. So I guess when he thought my plane might have disappeared into the Atlantic Ocean, it must have brought the poor boy so much distress. But unlike me, Hunter has quite the imagination on him, which I expect he gets from his mother. Let's just say at the very best of times, young children can be impressionable, and Hunter was hit hard by our 18-year-old Weimarana's death, and for so many bad things to happen all at once was not easy for my son to have to endure. Little did I know when that landline rang on that Friday morning that call would ultimately change the whole trajectory of my life in ways I never envisaged possible. At the inopportune time of the phone call, my family, including my wife's sister Helena, was looking extremely forward to enjoying the weekend together as a family. The call was from a millionaire client of mine, who owns his own private island. Yes, there are people out there so incredibly wealthy that they buy their own islands, as ridiculous as that may sound. The man had impulsively decided to spend a few days on his private island, and was asking me to fly his private jet for him at the very last minute. Let's just say I don't like impulsive arrangements like this from some of the most fickle millionaire clients, who can be as temperamental as the weather itself. I'm afraid to say many of them have this rather self-entitled attitude. They think if they simply click their fingers at you, that you'll come running. Sometimes a ubiquitous amount of wealth can bring out the very worst in a person. Believe me, I've witnessed that on far too many occasions. Another thing I've also observed is that people who have a whole lot of money never seem to have enough, no matter how insanely wealthy they become. It would seem having a bank account that gets steadily fatter by the second brings them unparalleled pleasure. Having said that, to be fair, I have worked for some men, or very wealthy people if you like, who have been very generous and considerate. So you can't even typecast the millionaire breed, as they, much like ourselves, are not all made of the same cloth. I told this very presumptuous, demanding client of mine that no, I could not possibly fly him and his small entourage of friends and chefs and servants and so forth to his private island, as I was intent on enjoying my weekend with my wife and child and her sister. But my client would not take no for an answer. He began to behave on the phone exactly like a surly, petulant, precocious brat that was not getting his way. Let's just say money does talk. We know it does. And this man, who had more money than sense, was resolutely determined for me to fly him to his privately owned island. He was offering me a nice, generous windfall that I would have been a fool to refuse, because like your average American man, I have bills that need to be paid, and responsibilities. Let's just say this ostentatious client of mine wore designer glasses, thick, very brash gold chains around his neck, diamond watches that were so bright with bling they were almost blinding. Every time I took him to his private island, he was always so typically inviting ditzy, slim, blonde women to accompany him on these trips. Of course I knew they were only interested in the man for his money, for he had about as much charm as a disgruntled walrus, and was not exactly a likeable character. Actually, he was vulgar and crass. I was quite sure, even if I was a ditzy blonde, spending time in his company had to be insufferable to say the very least. So if they were milking him for the money, they pretty much earned every penny as far as I was concerned. It was at times like this that made me fully appreciate what I had in quality relationships with my wife Bridget and my son Hunter, as despite my client's wealth and opulent fancy lifestyle, with all his fancy sports cars and houses in Martha's Vineyard and Miami, along with trips to Monaco, I really believe his life was vacuously empty. It turned out I was right, as 3 years later he deliberately took his own life with a drug overdose, so all the money in the world and islands in the sea had not made him a happy man. Needless to say, my wife and child were grievously disappointed that I would not be home for that weekend, as I had accepted this job offer. Don't get me wrong, I do love my job, as flying people around in their private planes can be exhilarating indeed. But on this specific weekend, I had faithfully promised to spend that time with my family. So going on this plane on this private flight was the last thing I wanted to do. I had felt extremely indignant, as had my wife Bridget. She was in a foul mood. She felt I'd really let her down. I left the house feeling nothing less than a prize cad. I hated the way my rich clients would manipulate me in the way they did, like a puppet on a string, or threaten to never use me again as a pilot if I didn't agree to drop everything for them at a moment's notice, which is what these rich clients of mine had done to me over and over again. Because if I turned them down, then I knew that I would never get the job again. "Why are you doing this?" Bridget complained. "You promised me, Anton, you'd spend the weekend with us, and now you're letting us down again. Don't we matter to you at all? Or does your job always come first? Are you always going to prioritize your clients over us? We're your family. You know that Hunter was looking so forward to you taking him fishing at the creek over the weekend. He wanted to spend some quality time with his father, and now you're letting him down yet again. You're breaking his poor little heart." "I'm very sorry, love, but it's good money. This client of mine won't take no for an answer. If I refuse him my services, he'll never hire me again. And furthermore, he'll probably tell his own rich friends not to hire me either. I need the work, love, to provide for the family. I will make it up to the both of you, I promise." "But, Daddy, you promised to take me fishing at the creek," Hunter protested. "You said we could also ride our mountain bikes down the trail. You promised, Daddy." It broke my heart to see my son's obvious disappointment. But I knew I'd have to make it up to him another time. I'm sure he had heard those faint promises often enough, and I must have been beginning to sound like a broken record, that was playing the same old tune yet again. My wife pulled a disenchanted face. She looked exasperated with me, and I couldn't blame her for that. But at the same time she appeared resigned to the fact that I would be absent from the house that weekend. "That's what I hate about your clans, Anton," she told me. "Some of them are obnoxious. I'm sorry, but they are. They think they can wave their money around and you'll come running. Do these people even realize that you have your own life to live? Or have they completely forgotten about that? It seems to me they only think about themselves. That's all they think about. I can't stand these stinking rich clans of yours. They have absolutely no compassion or consideration." It was on my return journey from dropping off my excessively wealthy client, with his entourage of chefs and servants and blonde women, to his privately owned island, that things became profoundly strange. I was flying over the Bermuda Triangle when everything went weird, and when I say weird, there is no other way to describe it. Everything was routine. It was a predictably normal flight, on a perfectly ordinary, unremarkable day, with good weather conditions, very clear visibility, and no turbulence whatsoever. I thought, like all my other flights, this would be routine as the next one, only it wasn't. All of a sudden I saw this thick white mist materializing in front of my eyes, and my thoughts were, "What the hell is that?" All of a sudden my client's plane dipped and began to shake and rattle precariously, and nothing in my plane appeared to be working. The communications went completely bonkers. But I refused to panic. As a pilot, you have to have your wits about you at all times. If you panic, that is when you can put your life and the lives of passengers on your flight in danger, as panic can make people do very stupid things without applying sensible reasoning. Suffice to say, I was unable to connect with airport control. My signals had gone completely haywire. I was vacuum suctioned down what I can only describe as some kind of vortex or wormhole. It was like I was flying through the white vapour, which appeared to be like a long, mysterious tunnel that was made up of white mist. When I reached the end of the tunnel, my plane became calm again, and everything began to operate smoothly, except I was not able to communicate with airport control anymore. I began to fly over land masses that I had never seen before a day in my life, and water that was purple and not blue at all. The first thought in my head was, where the hell am I? For I had never seen this geographic layout before. It was all unfamiliar to me and uncharted. What I was seeing made me realize that I must have slipped into a parallel universe that was vastly different to our own world, and yet uncannily similar at the very same time. Some people describe our world like an onion with many layers, and some of those layers represent different universes. For someone who had no imagination like myself, this was more than a little bewildering for me. I found myself flying over unfamiliar terrain. I observed high-rise buildings made of shimmering reflective glass, so incredibly different to our own, so much more advanced and sophisticated, that gave off a rainbow bedazzling layer of colours that were exquisitely beautiful, so much so that I have never seen colours such as this on our earth. It all took my breath away, and everything about this landscape was so much brighter and more vibrant than our earth. I thought I must be dreaming, and yes, I didn't want to leave this place because I was blown away by it all, and I was flying lower in order to take it all in. The next thing I knew is that I was met with more thick fog and another curious tunnel, and I flew through this with another vacuum suction-like effect, and lo and behold, I was back on home turf again. Part of me was relieved, the other part of me extremely disappointed. I knew at once where I was. I recognized the terrain. I stared down at the vast ocean. Finally, everything began to operate smoothly. I was getting communication from airport control. They were saying that they had been panicking for they had lost my signal for a significant period of time, and my signal was spotted again on the radar. They had informed my wife about this anomaly, and she had become exceedingly distressed and worried about me. I am not sure what happened. Everything went by at what seemed like the speed of light, but it would seem I did enter a parallel universe for longer than I had imagined, without expending any energy on the plane, as if time had been of little relevance. I'm not going to kid. With hand on heart, I was a little disappointed to be back to a certain extent. I guess I would have liked to have made a greater study of this unorthodox world that I was privy to seeing. As you can appreciate, I had more questions about this than answers. I was like a worm in an apple, that had found myself in another area of the apple that I did not know existed, that tasted sweeter and juicier than the other parts of the apple that I was more familiar with. For days I wondered where I had been, and how I had not lost control of my plane, when everything had failed to work, and how my plane had expended no extra energy. By all accounts, my idiosyncratic experience shifted my paradigm of the world exponentially. Let's just say when I returned from that flight, I think I was a different person. The cynical side of my character had all but dissipated. Everybody was asking me what exactly happened, why my plane had inexplicably lost signal. But I simply said, I really don't know. And that is true to a certain extent. I guess it's one of those flukes, I said. Don't forget I was flying over the Bermuda Triangle. Weird things can happen there, right? I guess people accepted that rather feeble explanation of mine. What else could they do? I was not going to tell anybody what had happened to me. I was struggling to believe my bizarre experience myself. How could I possibly share it with anyone else? My wife, Bridget, was not so easily fooled. Neither was my 10-year-old son, Hunter. Both knew I was keeping something from them, but how could I tell them about my paradoxical experience when I was trying to come to terms with it myself, by asking myself again and again and again, did that really happen? But I assure you it most certainly did. I believe when strange things happen to a person, the vast majority of people don't want to share that experience with anyone, and it's not only for fear of ridicule, but because these things can be very, very personal. So there we are. That is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.